Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high-income earners come to learn wealth-building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth-building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into today's episode of the Money Insights Podcast. I'm Christian Allen here with my much better looking co-host, Rod the Pod Zabriskie. Rod, what's up, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good, man. The sun is shining and it is a good day. It's a good day.
Awesome.
So, Rod, you had some big news in your family recently. Tell us about it.
Yeah. So our son, Spencer.
Which number is he?
He's our fourth child.
Four
Yep.
of seven. Okay.
Yep. And it's kind of, I kind of have a struggle with how to say this because we had his whole wedding day yesterday, except he was married last September. So he's in the Army. It got a little tricky. They were trying to make plans.
Okay.
And making plans was impossible. So they said, okay, well, we're going to target June for our wedding, but then they decided he could be deployed. He could whatever. I'll have all different kinds of things that could happen between when they were planning this last year to now. And so they're like, well, so we'll go ahead and get married in a kind of more quiet ceremony. It was still really cool experience. But we also want to have that experience where we can have people come and celebrate with us and whatnot. So that's what we did. Had a little celebration day yesterday.
Was I invited to that?
I think I sent you the invitation.
Okay, well, I feel like I don't remember getting it, Rod. But anyway, I apologize for missing Spencer. I apologize. I'll hook you up. Don't worry. Okay, so Spencer probably doesn't listen to this, but maybe you can send him this episode and he can hold my feet to the fire on it.
Tell him to jump to this spot in the recording.
Yep, and he'll be good to go. And then he can play it back to me and be like, I'm waiting, Christian, I'm waiting. Okay, anyway, congrats, man. That's really cool. You've got like a gazillion kids and now they're all getting married and it's just like a wild time, right?
Yeah, we thought the family was done growing. We're just getting started into another phase here.
Just going, man. Yeah. Okay, well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Okay, Rod, so our topic for today is the DNA of a successful business. And the reason this came to my mind is because I saw firsthand like this terrible experience with a business that did everything wrong, and at least in my eyes. Mm-hmm. So when I say the DNA of a successful business, this is the DNA of a successful business according to Rod and Christian. So feel free to fight us against it. This is our story. We're rolling with it. But let me just tell you, I got an email. Obviously we get solicitation emails all the time. We all do, right? I got a solicitation email and it was specifically about like it was a lead expert in the insurance industry. They were like, hey, do you want to do XYZ? And I was like, okay, I wonder what bill of goods these people are selling was basically what was going through my head, right? Because normally those are just kind of a joke and oftentimes they're scam. But either way, I was like, I try to be open enough to be like, all right, if there's other opportunities, if there's ideas and things that people are using that I'm not aware of or haven't been using, like I don't want to be so ignorant or too prideful to not look at those things. So I open up the emails, I check it out. This one was pretty vague, and like I watched a couple of videos but it was enough that I was like, all right, I'll see what they're doing. They're doing something with AI, right? So I schedule a meeting with the sales rep. I don't even know what the person was. Okay, starting point. The video comes from a guy who in the video says, I'll be meeting with you personally. Mm-hmm. And then when you schedule it, you're like, well, that's not the name of the guy.
Yeah.
So problem number one for me was, okay, well, they already were, misrepresenting what's actually happening. So I'm like, it's a little off. But it only got worse from there, Rod. It got so much worse. So I got onto the sales call and I kid you not, this girl was so rude. She literally wouldn't let me ask a question. And she said to me so at one point I was like, hey, do you mind if I just ask you a quick question? And then I started asking it and she cut me off and she's like, I have a process. I don't answer questions right now. And I was like, oh, and I was like, oh, sorry. Well, normally, like in our sales process, we always tell people, hey, this is about you. So if you have any questions or concerns or anything that you want to bring up, we want to make sure that we're hitting on those first and foremost. So just philosophically, I'm already like, okay, this is not how I run things, right? This isn't how I believe it's meant to be. And the point is, it just got worse and worse, and it was just a bad call overall. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, like, it was totally like, she was basically scripted. She didn't listen at all. I would answer a question, and her response would have nothing to do with what I just. It was just this bizarre, like, what is happening here? And yet there was some elements of the business that were interesting, and so I was like, okay, this just makes me think to myself, let's talk about what not to do. But then I was like, well, that's a little bit negative. So instead of talking about what not to do, it kind of stirred me to thinking about what makes up a successful business. And so the instigator, if you will, of this podcast was our friend Louisa. I won't give a last name. Louisa, thank you for the inspiration for us to do the DNA of a successful podcast, the DNA of a successful business on today's episode of the podcast.
Brilliant. Okay. I'm excited.
With that being the case, Rod, we're just going to jump right into it. Key number 1, you've got to have a clear vision and mission. Maybe talk about why we think that's important, and maybe, kind of how we approach trying to make sure we have a clear vision and mission and are ongoingly doing that.
Yeah, well, it goes back to Covey's comment of starting with the end in mind. If you don't have clarity on who you are, what you're trying to accomplish, what result you want to have come about from your business, then it's really tough to get there. As an individual, it's tough to get there, but then especially when you're building a team and you want everyone to work cohesively together towards a certain end, well, you need to be really clear about what that end is, right? What the vision is around what you're trying to accomplish.
I really believe in intentionality, right? So
yeah,
I remember years ago, I was part of a sales organization, and the emphasis stopped becoming on the result and became almost too focused on the process. Like, what is it that we're doing? And like, if we do this well, while forgetting that the goal was to actually create a result, right? So intentionality is really important. You have to have a clear vision, and you can't skip that step. So starting with the end in mind, like you said, is a critical and important step. That's key number 1. Let's jump into key.
Sorry.
Oh, wait, you got another one.
Yeah, I have a couple of examples that I pulled and I thought would be helpful.
Perfect.
So the first one is from Amazon. Their vision is to be Earth's most customer-centric company, where customers can find and discover anything they might want to buy online. And if you've ever experienced Amazon, which I'm sure everybody has, that makes sense, right? When you think about what they do, the way they go about doing it, it is to build an experience and a result, which is clearly defined in that vision statement.
Okay, well, they've done a solid job of accomplishing that goal, because I think most people believe that, or at least most people think when they're looking for something online, immediately they're like, well, let's go to Amazon, right? Yep. So like, to a large degree, they've done. You also mentioned like it's a wide-ranging goal, but it's like very focused at the same time, right? Yep. They're obviously selling like anything and everything, but if our focal point is to be able to accomplish that all on, well, anyway, it's a really good example.
Yeah, and Earth's, right?
Big audacious goal for sure.
That's right.
Accomplished.
Good job. Okay, and then the other one I wanted to share was Southwest Airlines. And not everyone has maybe experienced flying on Southwest, but they do have a reputation. And what I would say is, among the different airlines, I think they're set apart in just in the, I don't know, the culture, the feeling that you get that comes from them. And they're much more, I don't know, colorful and just, I don't know, exciting. And if you have flown with them, and you get the right crews, and you get them telling jokes, and you get, They want to make it more of a fun environment, a fun experience, right?
Okay.
Okay. So
I don't have enough like flying experience to know much about Southwest as a culture, but that's an interesting one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and there are other things that people don't like about them. Like I was highlighting some of the things that they really are very intentional to your point about creating a fun environment. And then there are some things that are kind of annoying, like lining up, the way they line you up and you have a place. Anyway, their vision is to become the world's most loved, most flown, and most profitable airline.
Okay. I like it.
Concise.
I like it. Strong vision, strong, concise vision and mission statements. Okay. And obviously if you're going to do it, a good idea is to actually like write them down, make it a plan, right? So now when I say this is one of those things that's kind of a cliche, like, hey, you have to have everything written down. It has to be documented. I do believe that that business plans are important. Mm-hmm. But I don't think they have to be complex, right? So like, even if it's a 1-page business plan, something that gives you that clear vision, that's really the key. Okay, Rod, let's move on to key number 2, which is you've got to have strong leadership. Maybe this is obvious, but maybe kind of your initial thoughts on why that's important, and then I'll throw in what I can come up with.
Yeah, I think it becomes obvious if you don't have strong leadership, and basically what shows up is there's lack of direction, there's lack of clarity, and so basically what strong leadership does is it takes that vision, that mission that you created on the front end, and it is carrying it out, right? It's the backbone behind, making all the different things happen. And we're going to get into additional items that will come about because of the vision and mission, because of the strong leadership. But weak leadership or lack of leadership in an organization usually leads to really lack of progress, lack of direction.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, if you want a successful business, you have to have a focused leader who actually knows how to lead, because oftentimes there's brilliant people who don't necessarily know how to lead, which in some companies is why they'll have a founder that's not necessarily the president of the company, because maybe they're brilliant in some specific way, but like leadership and communication isn't their strength, right? At the end of the day, like if you want your business to succeed long term, you've either got to become a good leader yourself, or you've got to hire good leaders, or if you're looking at it as an investor, you've got to invest in companies that have good leadership. And the one that always comes to my mind is Warren Buffett. The stuff that he leads, that he invests in, the companies that he owns tend to be heavily focused in quality leadership. He usually puts people in that he knows and trusts, and that have a really strong track record of success. And historically, not always, but historically, those companies tend to continue to do well because of that strong leadership.
Absolutely.
Okay, Rod. Number 3, our third key to success, we want to have the right DNA for a successful business, is customer focus. And again, I was saying this before, but we have to be hyper focused on our customer, because if we're not, well, actually, before I start this, I'll just say this. It's shocking how many businesses exist that don't have a strong or really any focus on the customer. It shows, and over time, it becomes difficult to have like the long-term brand and success that most businesses are wanting to achieve. More often than not, when you see businesses like that, they're short-term successes because of trends or something like that. But then when those key element, like when those outside trends aren't there to propel the business, and now you've got to have these key elements, if those aren't there, well, that's when we see things blow up.
Yeah, it may go without saying that you should know who your customer is, what they want, and then give it to them, right? Like that seems so obvious. And yet, like you're saying, there are so many companies, the focus is more on the product, more on themselves. And so when they're putting marketing material out there, again, I'm not saying you shouldn't talk about the features and benefits that your product or service provides, but speak of it in terms of the customer experiencing those things, right? And that may seem like a subtle difference, but it's huge in terms of your focus. Who are you hyper focused on? And that comes through. It shows through just in the way you communicate and all the different other things that we're going to talk about here.
So one of the examples that comes to my mind is one of our competitors that does is it specifically in the life insurance space, right? The alternative investment life insurance space. And one of the things we've seen firsthand is people who are focused on selling, on getting policies set up, but they're not focused on actually helping the customer ongoingly, right? Mm-hmm. They're not providing ongoing customer service, because at the end of the day, like the only way I can like, mend those thoughts together, for lack of a better word of saying it, is just that has to be an over focus on themselves and what they can get out of it. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, especially when you're talking about like what's crazy about this is we have an old partner we used to work with, and they'll write, big policies people are putting a lot of money into, investing significant dollars into, and they're just like, oh, you can go talk to the insurance company. Good luck. Right. Yeah. To me, it's absolutely crazy. But again, it's one of the things that separates really successful long-term good businesses is they're hyper-focused on the customer, because they know that the customer is what makes the business. Kind of end of story.
Right. And so in that case, again, I'm not in his head, but you could say that his focus is more on maybe the product, right? As long as I get him set up in the right product, then we're good. But in reality, the investment optimizer specifically is what you're referring to, is a long-term plan, right? And having the right policy, having it built in the right way is a critical part of that, but that's just the starting point. If they're not actually using it, or if we're not facilitating and helping them to use it, and answering questions along the way, making changes when necessary, all of those things, then they're just left on their own, right? They're floundering. And maybe they'll figure it out. Maybe they'll get all the, all the knowledge or whatever that we have, but that's not what they signed up for, right? They thought they were signing up for somebody who was actually going to help them through the process. And we feel very strongly that we need to be doing that, because that's what we're offering. That's what we're, setting up in the first place.
Well, so again, you can differentiate yourself as a business in a really meaningful way just by having that hyper focus on the client, the customer, the person you're serving. Okay, that was number 3, Rod. We have 10 of these, so let's keep going through it. Number 4 is you absolutely have to have an effective marketing strategy. Why is it important?
Yeah, I mean, take what we just talked about, and you need to create a message, some way to communicate that to the customers, right? So if you have that customer focus, but they don't know about it or they don't understand it, the marketing message is what bridges that gap. So you're making them aware of it. You're helping them understand what it is, how it will help them. And maybe even in some cases, if needed, demonstrating it. So that's where a lot of our marketing messaging comes in, is the investment optimizer isn't just something people know about, right? There's a lot of education that has to happen with it. And so a lot of our marketing efforts are in that. It's helping people to not just understand, okay, here's what it is and here's how it works, but to see it in action, to see real people using it, real life examples of how they can use it, because there's more to it than just, oh, great, that's what it is. I want in, right? We don't see that happen.
Yeah. So creating messaging is a big part of a marketing strategy. And really, at the core of it, it's about acquisition, customer and client acquisition, right? You can have all of the other pieces to a good business, but if you haven't figured out how to crack the code and become effective in marketing, everything else can flounder, right? Your leadership can be really good. You can have a clear vision and mission, but if there's no pathway to actually execute on that, then that becomes a problem. So what do? I think planning, right? I always feel like having a plan going into it is a really critical, important part of effective marketing. I feel like you have to be able to make adjustments and adapt to changes along the way. So the last thing you can expect to do is have a set it and forget it marketing strategy that just lasts your business's lifetime. Chances are that's not going to work, right? Especially with all of the changes we see in technology and everything else. Like there has to be that kind of updating and adaptability that goes with it. But at the end of the day, you have to have a plan and execute that plan. Otherwise, you're not going to have a successful business. So marketing is critically important. And the other thing I would say in this is you generally have to invest in it. Now, it doesn't always have to be money. It could be time and energy and effort. It could be money. But generally speaking, marketing takes a little bit more, right? It's not one of those things that just comes. It's one of the great differentiators between a business that's successful, that is successful, and one that fails. Well, for obvious reasons. If I can't get a client, if I can't get a customer, I can't drive revenue, can't create profits, nothing else works.
Yep. And to your point, if you can't, even if you've had that figured out, you have to be updating it ongoing. So Christian always laughs when I talk to people about how my undergraduate degree was in marketing communications. Well, guess when I graduated? In the year 2000. Has anything changed?
No, it looks exactly
24 years.
Rod's like, oh yeah, let's bust out a really killer freeway road sign.
Yeah. Magazine
billboard, magazine ads. He's like, radio. I got some good stuff for you. Okay, radio's not totally out of touch now, but some of those others are a little harder. It's evolved. Yeah. Your point's well taken. Okay, so key number 5, Rod, is you got to have a well-defined sales process. This goes back to my kind of instigator of the pod, which now maybe they had it well-defined as I look back on it. It was just really bad. So I should say you've got to have a good and well-defined sales process. But really it goes back to the other stuff, right? Like if you've got a well-defined sales process and it's focused on the customer, the chances are it's going to be a good, it's going to have good, solid results. And just like everything, you've got to be willing to adjust and change, adapt, right? We get that. But making sure that the process is in place before you're just sending people off and hoping, they come back with sales, like it makes a lot more sense to maybe this is weird because I'm thinking about it in terms of like when we invest in a business, but I'm also thinking about it in like my own business and, all the people who are listening who have their own businesses. And so it might look a little bit different depending on, what element you're trying to focus on. But regardless of whether you're Amazon or whether you're Money Insights, having that well-defined sales process and being customer focused ends up being a really critical element or critical elements.
Yeah. And the two, and kind of the different elements that come into that are, you have the lead generation, and a lot of that begins with the marketing, basically turning it in from the message that you're communicating into people who are interested that now come into the funnel. Then you have to qualify those leads, make sure that you're a good fit for them and they're a good fit for you. You need to nurture them at some level, bring them along and make sure that they can get their questions answered. Critical, right? Questions answered.
The whole thing.
And learn like what it means to do business with you, and then, close the deal, right? And like we talked about earlier, building in that follow-up, the follow-through with all the things that you set up, the promises that you made, making sure that you're continuing to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like I like that you brought that up, because I just think, again, one of the big differentiators in a business is doing what you say you'll do. And so if you follow through, well, let's put it this way, it's a lot easier to follow through if there's a process defined and in place. Yes. It becomes really difficult, especially when you start having success. Let's say I start having sales and I've made a promise and suddenly I'm overwhelmed. If I don't have a process in place to make sure that I'm following through, delivering on promises, then all of a sudden this great business opportunity, this great business that I've been building, becomes problematic instead. So having that process in place on the front end, really critical, really important. Okay. Key number 6 is, Rod, you've got to have quality financial management. And again, this is obvious, but if you don't have good management of and really I say this all the time, the easiest way to make sure you're managing money well is to have liquid capital. always have plenty of liquid capital. You never find yourself in trouble. But the reality is whether you're investing in a company or whether you're building a company, both elements require discipline and thoughtful financial management so that you don't end up finding yourself in trouble, right? It could be, there's a lot of ways that could happen. You could overly invest in the business and find yourself over leveraged, right? You could underinvest in the business and not give yourself an opportunity to grow and progress. And so it really is kind of finding a balancing act between making sure that we're doing both of those things, but just being thoughtful. And again, having cash on hand is a great solution to making sure that you don't end up botching your financial, infrastructure, so to speak.
Yeah. And this includes really exciting things like budgeting, right? Having goals in mind. And I know I keep saying this, but it really goes back to it's like we're putting in building blocks here, because you're going back to your vision, your customer focus, the way you're setting up the marketing and the sales process, et cetera, and making sure that you have the pieces in place to make those things happen, but not going crazy on it, right? I think you made the point in the marketing plan that just throwing money at something doesn't mean it's going to be successful. You have to be measuring and understanding the success of it. And we'll take that and apply that across the board, right? Having that financial analysis in place so you can understand where you're spending your money is effective. If there are more effective ways, then we're making adjustments as we go.
Yeah, and this applies everywhere, but like data and tracking, the more of those kind of things that I can have at my fingertips, the better opportunity I have to make good decisions. And so in the financial space, it means I have to actually be looking at the numbers, know what's happening in order to extract those gems, because numbers tell a story, right? And especially inside of a business, they tell a story of what's working and what's not. And so it just becomes a critical element to make sure that we're managing that appropriately. Okay, Rod, the key number 7 we've been hitting on over and over and over throughout this, because it literally applies to every single point, but that is innovation and adaptability. Talk about why that's a critical element to a successful business.
Yeah, well, let's start with my example of it was really funny to think about, but marketing is different today than it was in the year 2000, right? And what's funny is I remember in my classes reading and hearing about things like, what's crazy is you can actually like read a book, but it's on a screen. Or, anyway, Amazon was in its infancy. Well, here's their grand vision of what they're going to become. They're losing money in huge numbers right now, but they have this vision of what they can become. And man, they hit that and maybe even have exceeded what they originally thought, right? So, but the point is to be forward thinking, to be on the front edge of technology and just that innovation that happens. You want to be on the cutting edge of that, not falling behind, because there's always danger in other companies that innovate ahead of you, basically cutting you off, and all of a sudden you're Blockbuster, right? You're going out of business.
You want to be Apple, not Blockbuster. Yep. Be Apple, not Blockbuster. That's pretty simple, right? Just make that your mission statement. Be Apple, not Blockbuster. And obviously, there's tons of examples of companies on both sides of that fence, and so we've seen it over and over and over, and especially to your point, as technology has changed so much. So, Okay, Rod. Number 7 is innovation and adaptability. Key number 8 is you've got to have a good, positive culture. Culture is critical to the success of a business. I think we all know that, and part of that, or maybe the main reason, is because the way that people feel will have a direct reflection on the work that they do, right? So if I can go into my work feeling good about it, being excited, feeling optimistic, all of those things lead to better outcomes, better results. And obviously the same is true if I go in there feeling like it's drudgery, it's painful, I don't want to be there, I'm likely to get results that reflect that kind of culture. So the question, I think, is I think we all know that you have to have a positive culture, Rod. So maybe what are some things that you can think about that that come to your mind when you think, here's how to actually create a positive culture overall?
Yeah, this one's a little more tricky than the other ones because I can write my marketing plan. I can decide on what I'm going to, where I'm going to, put my efforts and my dollars and that kind of thing. When it comes to culture, it's not all in my hands, right? So when you talk about it from the standpoint of an employee coming to work every day, and can I influence that? Of course I can, right? As a business owner, I can have a part of that strong leadership is being a good communicator, empowering my employees to do what I'm asking them to do, et cetera. But the other part of it is that there are other people out there, other employees, right? That can help define that culture, make the experience be different. And so you have to be keeping your ear to the floor as it relates to those kinds of things, because you don't want to unknowingly be creating a culture that's not what you really intended for it to be. But it happens, and it can happen pretty quickly depending on if you have the wrong people, wrong people in the wrong seats, right, on the bus, all those things, so that the culture gets negatively impacted.
I kind of feel like, just like you've been hitting on this idea of steps, culture directly will be a reflection of the steps that I've been able to take along the way to create the kind of business that I want, right? So when people are frustrated, when they're upset, like obviously we know that it's going to create poor outcomes, but I think the challenge is a lot of times people don't know necessarily how to change that. And you've talked, you were just talking about this idea of like, okay, it is a little bit more there. It's a little bit more fluid, and yet there's key principles that we can put in place. And it starts from my perspective, it starts with your philosophy, and your leadership, like the way that you act, right? If I'm a leader that's like, hey, I'm going to be militant and come down hard on people, I'm probably going to have a culture that is militant and comes down hard on people. Yeah. And you have to ask yourself, is that the kind of culture that people are likely to thrive and be excited in? Right. Well, maybe there are some examples of businesses that do great in that form, but I think especially in today's world, that just doesn't work, right? We have to be more positive. It has to be more uplifting, because here's the thing. There are companies today who are focused on this, and the best people will go and flock to the companies that they feel comfortable with, that they feel like they can go and make a difference. And when I talk about philosophy, I think it comes back to things like not being exclusively focused on money, and making sure that there's always an emphasis on the customer and driving a value, creating real benefit for people, something that we can all get behind and feel like, hey, this isn't just about making the company more money and me getting a paycheck. It's about delivering something to our customers and clients that's really going to improve their world in some meaningful way, right? Yeah. And it could be, in our world, like we feel like it does that, across their entire financial world, but it doesn't even have to be that drastic, right? It could be a board game that brings joy to a family, right? There's a lot of ways that you can bring real value, but the key is the culture, the people have to be on the bus. They have to kind of be feeling that vision and mission. And of course, once you do that, man, you've got all sorts of opportunity to grow and progress and do the things you want to, accomplish the things you want to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thought on this is that management is obviously key in that, right? So when you are putting managers in place, you want to make sure that they're obviously good on the technical side, right? The what of what you want them to accomplish, but then you also want to make sure they're good on the cultural side, right? The how, right? How do they go about doing those things, communicating with people, working with the team, and so you want to be as focused on that as you are on the technical side.
Okay, so the 9th key is operational efficiency. Man, that's a boring word. And yet, okay. So when people think about operational efficiency, I think they think about things like how quick I, move from process to process, how quickly I get things, my paperwork done, that kind of, I know paperwork, right? Does anyone do paperwork anymore? But I think those are those are the things that generally come to mind, like how quickly I'm accomplishing those things. But oftentimes we don't think about the why operational efficiency is important, right? So part of it is that inside of a company, inside of a business, and again, a successful business, part of it is profitability. And so if I'm not creating a profit, then I'm not going to have a successful business. Well, operational efficiency directly links to my ability to create a profit margin that continues to support the business, that gives the business an opportunity to grow and invest back in itself, and to deliver the promises to the people, whether it's customers, clients, shareholders, whoever those people are that are important. And that's like all of those elements are why operational efficiency is so important. And then my last thing, Rod, is I just don't like to waste time. I don't like to work just to work. Some people dig that. Some people are like, okay, my goal, like I just like to work hard. And I'm like, okay, well, I like to accomplish a lot, but I like to accomplish a lot with as little effort as I possibly can. That might just be me, but that's one of the reasons I think operational efficiency becomes so important, because we can get way more done if we're just thinking about those elements. It's surprising how much dead space, dead weight, dead money exists. And I'm certainly guilty of this. So anyway, long story short, operational efficiency is critical, and it'll make you more money. So that's why I'm game for it.
Yeah. And it's processes and systems. So I think we've talked a lot about processes, but you can have a process. You can have a very well-defined process written down. And if it's written down in a book somewhere and nobody pays attention to it, then it's not doing you any good, right? You have to put the systems in place to carry out those processes. We've probably all had experiences of being on
process and system. Are these semantics, Rod?
Well, okay. So here's
between a process and a system. Really,
here's the difference to me is the process you've set up what's supposed to happen, but then the system. So for example, let's say you have a sales process, right?
The system
way that people engage
on the process,
with your group,
is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So you have the CRM and you have other pieces in place, the system around it that make it move the way it does. Right. So we've probably all had experiences with, customer service line, and you say, well, here, this is what our process is. And they're describing something to you that doesn't even resemble what the experience that you had. You're like, okay, great. I'm glad you have that process, but maybe you should make sure that you have systems in place to make that happen. Right.
Okay. So it's the execution. The system is what's executing the process.
Yeah.
Okay, Rod, let's get to number 10. This is critically important, according to Rod and Christian, for a successful business, and that is an ongoing growth mentality. So I don't know if this is true. People always say you're either moving forward or backward. You can't just stay in the same place. I'm not sure if I totally agree with that. Like maybe within, like, you can go a couple inches, but nonetheless, the point is that you get what you are intentionally looking to get, right? And so growth will, if we don't have the mentality for growth, it's not just going to come, right? Like, it's kind of, I was going to give an example, Rod, but I realized this from the Book of Mormon, so I don't want to give that example. So but it's kind of like the idea of, like, you reap what you sow, right? If you're trying to accomplish growth, you're trying to build in like a meaningful way, the chances are you're likely to do that if you're happy, content with where you're at. So in our business, we see this all the time, right? Our business is interesting because, like, how do I pull the curtains back? So in the financial planning business, there's not very many businesses. There's mostly producers, right? And what we see really, really, like, typically is kind of like a lack of this growth mentality, a lack of belief, I think, what it is. But so often what we'll see is somebody in the financial services business, maybe they go out there, they start to get some clients, they find a little bit of success, and then they get someone that helps, an administrative assistant, and then they just like go throughout the rest of their career. And that's like, and maybe they make a few $100,000 and are doing well, but it's like, that's all that ever comes of it. And one of the things I think that's made us unique is that that's never been the goal, right? The goal's never been to, hey, can we, just generate a little bit of some income for the owners? It's always been, more about creating a company that does something meaningful that grows. And while the income is an element of why we drive, it's not the sole reason we drive for what we're trying to accomplish. So I don't know, as I try to bring it home, like that's kind of what comes to my mind. So for us, I feel like it's critical. And if nothing else, it's a lot more interesting and exciting, right? Like it's easy to get bored with anything if I'm not looking for opportunity to grow and expand. So all of those reasons, Rod, tell us why you think growth mentality is a critical element.
Well, I think this one is a great number 10 because it's almost like it brings all the different pieces together that we've talked about, because you can have a great customer focus, and yet if you're not motivated to grow, right, to improve, then the innovation and adaptability piece is not going to be there, right? So I know this is going to surprise people, but there are people in our industry who still do the business the same way it was done 50 years ago.
It's hard to believe, man.
Sit down,
hard to believe.
Face to face with a yellow pad. They're taking notes. And again, not all of the business is that way because they didn't have email 50 years ago or whatever. But
sure.
But functionally, like the way that they're actually going through the process is the same. And it's not going to work, right? It's not going to continue to allow them to succeed.
Well, and most of the time it kind of goes back to like this adaptability to your point, right? Like I kind of become a relic if I'm not changing and adapting. If I don't have a growth mindset, to your point, all of these keys work together. And so I like the idea that just the growth mindset basically says, I'm going to take these previous 9 keys and I'm going to put them together, and that's kind of what I get. I get this overall growth mindset. And when I have a growth mindset, chances are I'm going to have a growing company.
Yes.
That's of course what we want. I love it. Okay, Rod, is there anything we want to hit on? Anything we missed?
That was everything I had.
Okay, this has been fun. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us for today, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights Podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights Podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth-building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.